Captain Evelyn Trent stumbled out of the captain's cabin, one hand clutching the doorframe for balance, the other reaching desperately for the nearest console. Her head spun. She had definitely underestimated how much celebratory, pre-landing tequila it took to get through a colonization mission. The Exodus was in its final descent toward Zethu, a planet promised to be humanity's salvation. The ship was packed with eager colonists, everyone aboard praying that this lush, green exoplanet would be the answer to Earth's inevitable doom. Somewhere in the middle of all that hope and desperation, Evelyn had decided to celebrate a little too much. Now she was paying the price, and her hangover was a sharp reminder of why she should have stuck to water. All right, settle down, she mumbled to herself, tapping the intercom button with a grimace. Her voice cracked, and she cleared her throat. "This is your captain speaking. Captain Evelyn Trent, the one and only. You're all in for a treat. We are about to land on Zethu. A perfect, shiny new planet where nothing can go wrong." She paused. A bead of sweat dripped down her temple. "We have just landed. I mean, the Exodus is almost down. Look at that sky. It's perfect, folks, just perfect." A chorus of nervous chuckles echoed through the speakers, the colonists no doubt exchanging glances with one another as they tried to gauge the captain's level of sobriety. Despite herself, Evelyn cracked a grin as she staggered toward the command deck. Through the view screen, Zethu stretched below them, a jewel of green and blue. Forests, rivers, mountains, and seas perfect. If anything could restore humanity's broken dreams, it was this planet. She waved at the crew. "We're landing soon. It'll be fine. Just don't panic. And please do not attempt to eat the alien berries. I repeat, no berries." Someone in the back snorted. "Why not? They're probably delicious." "Because," Evelyn replied, still somewhat slurring her words, "the last time someone tried that, they hallucinated the ship was trying to eat them. And then it actually ate their sandwich." More laughter bubbled up, but it was the kind of nervous laughter people made when they were on the brink of a monumental decision. It was the kind of laugh that said, "We have no idea what we're getting ourselves into." Zethu was perfect, too perfect. The skies were a vibrant azure, the trees a strange kind of green that almost seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. The first few settlers began disembarking as soon as the Exodus touched down, their boots hitting the soft, welcoming soil of the new world. The air was fresh, intoxicating in its purity. The sun was warm, but not oppressive. The gravity felt like Earth's, and for the first time in decades, humanity had hope again. There was Dr. Lucy Gale, the biologist who had been assigned to study Zethu's flora and fauna. She stood beside a group of excited colonists, her eyes wide as she absorbed the scene. "There's nothing quite like this," she murmured, gazing around at the endless forests stretching out before her. "It feels alive." A soft wind blew through the leaves, creating ripples in the canopy above. It was almost like the planet was breathing. The ground beneath their feet felt stable, solid. There was nothing to fear here. Or at least, that's what Lucy thought. Over the next few days, the colonists settled in, setting up their first research station and beginning the task of familiarizing themselves with the alien world. The first thing they did was explore the land surrounding the settlement. It wasn't long before they noticed something strange. The plants, the trees, at first, had seemed normal enough, tall, sturdy trunks with bright green leaves. But as the colonists ventured deeper into the forest, they saw the first signs of odd behavior. Vines, thick and rope-like, seemed to grow in unnatural patterns, twisting toward the human structures. Some flowers, once red, turned purple overnight. The flowers themselves vibrated with a subtle, almost imperceptible hum. It wasn't quite a sound, but more like a low-frequency pulse that resonated in the chest, and the animals did it first. There was nothing alarming about the wildlife. Gentle herds of herbivores grazed by the settlement. Brightly colored birds flew in complex, almost ritualistic patterns. But something was wrong. As Lucy observed the wildlife, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching her. Not in the way an animal might be curious, but in a knowing, unsettling way, as if they understood what she was doing. On the fifth day, things took a darker turn. The first signs of something more dangerous appeared. Lucy was with a small team, collecting plant samples when she saw the first signs of aggression. A small rodent-like creature, no bigger than a rabbit, approached them slowly. It didn't seem afraid of them, which was strange enough. But when one of the settlers moved to pet it, the creature let out a low, guttural growl, baring teeth that looked far too sharp for its size. "Okay," Lucy said, stepping back. "Let's not touch that one. It's not friendly." That evening, the strange behavior escalated. The ground trembled slightly, and the air felt thick, as if the planet itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with the pulse of the flowers. Evelyn, still nursing her headache, convened a meeting. The colonists were beginning to panic. People had started to feel uncomfortable, their instincts on edge. A few had even claimed to hear whispers in the dark, voices that weren't their own. Lucy stood in front of the gathered group, trying to calm everyone down. "It's natural for an ecosystem to react to an introduction like ours. We're new, we're invasive. The planet's plants and animals might just be adjusting to us." But one of the engineers, a nervous-looking young man named Greg, interrupted. "What if it's not just adjusting? What if it's fighting back? What if these animals, these plants, they're not just evolving, they're reacting to us?" "I don't think the planet's hostile," Lucy said, but even as she spoke, she wasn't so sure. There was something unsettling in the way the world around them seemed to shift. The way the trees twisted, almost reaching for them. The next day, the first incident occurred. Dr. Gale was out in the field again, this time taking a sample of a glowing mushroom-like organism that had sprouted overnight. As she bent down to inspect it, she felt a sudden, sharp pain shoot through her head. It wasn't like anything physical, more like a sudden rush of pressure in her skull. She stumbled back, eyes wide. Her vision blurred for a moment, then cleared. But when she looked up, something had changed. The sky above her had darkened, and the trees, once vibrant and full of life, now seemed to twist and writhe as if they were alive and not in a benign way. She saw flashes of movement in the distance. Animals, large, predatory creatures, now lurked in the shadows. It was then that she heard the voice. It wasn't a voice in the usual sense, there were no words, but the thought felt like it had been planted directly in her mind. The planet, the living network beneath the surface, was speaking to her. "Leave. Leave now," Lucy recoiled, heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what this was, some kind of psychic phenomenon. A telepathic message from the planet itself. The sky above her seemed to pulse, and a low hum resonated through the ground. She could feel it, like the heartbeat of something far larger than herself, and then, without warning, the plants around her began to move. Lucy stumbled back, her heart hammering in her chest as the world around her seemed to warp and shift. The hum from the plants, now almost like a deep, ominous song, resonated in her bones, making the hair on her neck stand up. She could feel the air thickening, the weight of the planet itself pressing down on her. It was as if Zethu had taken a deep breath, inhaling her into its strange, pulsating ecosystem. The voice, if you could even call it that, rang in her mind again, sharper this time, more insistent. "Leave. Leave now." Lucy's mouth went dry. She turned to her team, her body frozen in place. They were still several yards behind her, chatting amongst themselves, oblivious to the sudden shift in the atmosphere. But Lucy knew. She knew they had to leave, and fast. She opened her mouth to shout a warning, but no sound came out. Her chest tightened, as though something was squeezing the air from her lungs. Panic started to claw at the edges of her mind. "What the hell is happening?" She staggered forward, breaking the paralysis that had gripped her. "Get back," she managed to rasp, her voice weak but urgent. "Now. We need to." Before she could finish, the ground beneath her feet trembled. It was subtle at first, just a faint vibration, like distant thunder rumbling on the horizon. But then it grew stronger, more insistent, until the very soil seemed to heave in waves. The trees swayed violently, their branches jerking and twisting as if they were alive and angry. "Lucy?" Greg, one of the younger scientists, called out from behind her, his voice wavering with uncertainty. "What's going on?" Lucy didn't answer. She couldn't. She was too busy trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The vines, the same ones she had marveled at just days earlier for their intricate patterns, were now moving on their own, slithering like snakes across the ground. They seemed to stretch toward her, towards all of them. The leaves, once calm and still, were rustling wildly, making a sound like 1,000 whispers. She turned, almost knocking into Greg as she rushed back to the others. Her breath was coming in short gasps. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice barely a whisper, her hands shaking. "Now." The others stared at her in confusion, not fully understanding the urgency in her tone. "What's happening?" Greg asked, his voice cracking. "Lucy, what's going on?" She didn't have time to explain. She didn't even know how to explain it. All she knew was that something had changed. Something had awakened on Zethu, something ancient, and it was warning them. Before she could say anything else, a piercing shriek split the air. It wasn't human, not even close. It came from somewhere deeper in the forest, a sound like metal scraping against metal, sharp and agonizing. And then silence. "Did you hear that?" Greg asked, his eyes wide with terror. "What the hell was that?" Lucy didn't have an answer. She could only nod, her mind racing. That sound, it wasn't just the plants. It felt like the planet itself had made that noise. She had no other way to explain it, but the feeling in her gut told her everything she needed to know. "Back to the ship," she ordered, her voice shaking but resolute. She grabbed Greg's arm, pulling him along. "Now. No time to waste." They ran, and the rest of the team followed, their panic matching her own. Behind them, the strange hum from the plants grew louder, more pronounced. The ground beneath their feet seemed to ripple, almost like the surface of water disturbed by a pebble, and then, out of the corner of her eye, Lucy saw a shadow darting between the trees. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the light, but no. It was too quick. Too deliberate. Someone was watching them. "Run faster." Lucy screamed, pushing Greg forward. "It's not just the plants. Something else is here." The group picked up the pace, running through the dense underbrush, branches slapping their faces, their legs tangling in the thick roots that seemed to grow faster with every step. The ship, the Exodus, was still a few kilometers away, but Lucy had no doubt they wouldn't make it in time if they didn't move faster. She heard the screech again, closer this time, and then, a rustling. Not from the plants, but from the forest itself. Something large, something fast, was moving toward them. "Stay together," Lucy shouted. "Don't split up." Her breath was coming in ragged bursts, her legs burning with exhaustion. But the fear in her chest spurred her on, pushing her faster than she thought possible. She could hear the others behind her, their breathing erratic, their footsteps faltering as they scrambled over the uneven terrain. Another shriek, louder now, closer, and Lucy felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She whipped around, expecting to see some kind of predator bearing down on them. But there was nothing. The forest was silent, the air thick with an oppressive, unnatural calm. They reached the clearing just as the first flashes of light from the Exodus came into view. The ship was still some distance away, but the sight of it gave Lucy a brief surge of hope. "Keep going," she yelled, pushing herself forward. She had to make it. She had to get everyone back to the ship. They were almost there when the ground gave way beneath them. One of the colonists, a young woman named Sarah, let out a strangled scream as her foot sunk deep into the soft earth. Lucy spun around, reaching for her, but before she could grab her, the earth closed around Sarah's leg, pulling her under. "No." Lucy screamed, but it was too late. Sarah was gone, swallowed whole by the planet, the others stood frozen for a moment, staring at the spot where Sarah had disappeared. The air was thick with shock, disbelief, and terror. "They were too late, we need to go," Lucy said, voice trembling. There was no time for mourning. They had to get out. With no time to waste, she turned and ran toward the ship. The others hesitated, but followed. Every step felt heavier. The pull of the planet, the weight of the air, felt suffocating. As they neared the ship, the trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches twisting like hands reaching out to grab them. The exodus wasn't far now, but Lucy felt the dread creeping up her spine. The ground trembled again, and this time it wasn't a subtle vibration, it was a violent shake, as if the entire planet was alive and angry. They were close now, so close. She could see the docking bay. The doors were open, waiting for them, but as she reached the threshold, something stopped her. A voice. It wasn't from the ship's intercom. It wasn't from any of the colonists. It was from inside her head. "Leave. Leave now, or the planet will claim you all." Lucy froze, her heart slamming into her ribs. It wasn't just a voice. It was a presence. Something ancient and powerful, something that had been waiting for this moment. She looked over her shoulder, half expecting to see something monstrous lurking in the shadows of the trees. But there was nothing. Only the soft whisper of the wind, and the ever-present hum of the planet beneath her feet. The rest of the team was already inside the ship, but Lucy stood rooted to the spot. The voice continued, louder now, insistent, "You don't belong here." And for the first time, Lucy wasn't sure if it was the planet speaking to her or something else, something that had been watching them from the very beginning. She took a shaky breath and turned toward the ship. She had no choice. There was nowhere else to go. The colonists had come to Zethu for a new beginning. But perhaps, she thought, as the ship's doors closed behind her, there was no beginning here. Not for them. Zethu was alive. And it was not about to let them stay. Evelyn's breath came in quick, shallow gasps as the doors to the exodus slammed shut behind her. The last of the colonists had already boarded, their faces pale and wide-eyed, faces that still held the lingering shock of what had happened in the forest. But Evelyn didn't have time to reflect on their fear or even her own. Zethu was not the sanctuary they'd hoped for. It was something far worse. "Captain." Lucy's voice cut through the haze in Evelyn's head. The biologist's footsteps hurried as she approached. "We've made a mistake." Evelyn turned to face her. "What's happened?" Her voice sounded weak, shaky. She hated that it sounded weak, but there was no denying it. The atmosphere of the ship, so familiar, so safe, felt hollow now. There was something about it that made her skin prickle, as though they weren't alone. Lucy's hands trembled, though she tried to mask it with a tight, professional grin. "I don't think we're just dealing with strange plant life. Zethu, it's not just alive. It's aware." Evelyn's stomach twisted, a sickening chill creeping up her spine. "Aware?" she asked, her words falling flat in the vast expanse of the ship's sterile hallways. "What do you mean, aware?" Lucy hesitated, eyes darting to the crew members who had gathered around, drawn to the urgency in her voice. I don't know how to explain it, but I heard it. The planet. It spoke to me." Her voice was small now, a whisper meant only for Evelyn. "It told me to leave." Evelyn swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing, trying to make sense of what Lucy was saying. It sounded insane. But the fear in Lucy's eyes made it impossible to dismiss. "And you think it was sentient? Intelligent?" "It's not just sentient," Lucy replied, her voice growing more frantic. "It's aware of us. It's watching us. And it's fighting back." Evelyn didn't respond at first. She couldn't. Her mind was still spinning, racing through the events of the past few hours. The tremors, the strange humming, the sense that something was always just out of reach, a presence, something waiting, watching. The rest of the colonists, disoriented and exhausted from the rush to the ship, stood in silence, their faces pale and gaunt, their eyes wide with the shared memory of Sarah's disappearance, the terrifying, inexplicable way the ground had swallowed her. Their gazes flickered toward Evelyn, their silent plea clear. "What now?" "We need to stabilize," Evelyn finally said, her voice stronger than she felt. "We're not going anywhere until we know what we're dealing with. And right now, I don't trust this planet. Not one bit." Lucy nodded sharply, her eyes burning with a mix of determination and terror. "I agree. But we need to figure out what's causing this. If the ecosystem is reacting to us," she broke off, her hands shaking again. "I think it's more than just plants. It's something in the atmosphere. A signal, maybe, or a biological defense mechanism." Evelyn clenched her fists at her sides, her mind whirling with the implications of Lucy's words. There was no doubt about it now. Zethu was not a new Eden. It wasn't a sanctuary waiting to be claimed, it was a battleground, one that they had walked into blindfolded. She didn't know who or what was behind it, whether it was a natural evolution or something more sinister, but she knew this. Zethu wasn't going to let them take it without a fight. She turned toward the cockpit, where her chief engineer, Marco, was already at the controls. "Marco," she called sharply, her tone brokering no argument, "what's our status? Is the ship secure?" "Yes, Captain," Marco replied without hesitation. His voice was strained, but calm. "We've secured all systems. The Exodus is fully operational. I've also locked down the external doors and the hangar bay, just in case." Evelyn nodded. That was good. At least they had control of the ship, for now. But the longer they lingered here, the more desperate the situation would become. Whatever was happening on the surface, it was clear that Zethu wasn't just another uninhabited planet to colonize. It was something alive, something that wouldn't tolerate their presence. "We need a plan," she said, turning to the group assembled behind her. "We need to figure out what Zethu is trying to tell us. It's clear that we're not welcome here. But we're not leaving without answers." Lucy spoke up immediately, her voice edged with the fear she hadn't quite been able to mask. "I think we need to make contact with it. Whatever it is, whatever intelligence is behind all of this, we need to understand it before it destroys us." Evelyn met her gaze, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't want to admit it, but Lucy was right. Their options were quickly dwindling. Staying inside the ship wasn't an option. At some point, the planet would find a way to force them out. If it hadn't already. "I'm going down," Evelyn said, her voice hard, resolute. "I need to understand what the hell we're dealing with. We need to find out if there's any way we can coexist with Zethu, or if we need to abandon it before it's too late. And I need volunteers. Who's with me?" There was a long silence. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Evelyn could hear the hum of the Exodus engines beneath her feet, the low pulse of the ship vibrating through the deck like a heartbeat. Every second spent in the ship was 1 second closer to disaster. "Captain," Marco said, his voice tight but determined. "If you're going down there, I'm coming with you. I can help with the tech, set up some monitoring equipment, maybe scan the air for toxins or any kind of electromagnetic interference." Evelyn gave him a sharp nod. "All right, Marco. Let's suit up. Anyone else?" The rest of the crew exchanged looks, their fear palpable, but none of them hesitated for long. Each one knew the risks. They had seen enough in the past few hours to understand that they were facing something far beyond their control. But they had signed up for this. They had come to Zethu in search of a future. And now, it was up to them to fight for that future, even if it meant fighting a planet that didn't want them there. Within minutes, they were suited up, prepared for the unknown. Lucy, Marco, and 3 other volunteers, all veterans of the mission, assembled in the airlock. As the countdown to the airlock seal began, Evelyn could feel the weight of their fear, their uncertainty, pressing down on her chest. The doors opened with a hiss, and the harsh light of Zethu's alien sky hit them. The air outside was cool and thick, buzzing with an energy Evelyn couldn't explain. She stepped out onto the surface, the dust settling beneath her boots, and immediately felt the change. It was subtle, but it was there, the same sense of unease she had felt before, that weight on her chest. The planet was watching. Lucy led the way, her steps hesitant at first, but growing more confident as she approached the clearing where they had been before, the place where the plants had twisted and moved, where the animals had become something else. The air was dense with the same hum, almost like a low vibration that she could feel deep in her chest. "We need to find the source of this," Lucy muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. "The network. It's got to be centralized somewhere." Evelyn nodded, pulling her jacket tight against the strange pull of the planet. She glanced up at the trees, which had begun to move again, their branches swaying in the breeze, but the breeze didn't feel natural. It was too controlled, too deliberate. There it was again, the sense of something watching, something waiting. It was coming from the heart of the forest. "Let's move," Evelyn said, her voice low but firm. "Stay close. We don't know what's out here." They moved deeper into the forest, the path growing more treacherous as they went. The trees, the vines, everything was alive, twisting and shifting in patterns that made no sense, like they were responding to their presence. And then, they saw it, a massive structure, buried deep beneath the roots of an ancient tree. It wasn't a natural formation, it was mechanical, almost like a cocoon, hidden in plain sight. It pulsed with a strange, sickly glow. Evelyn's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a planet. It was a prison, and they had walked right into it. End of the story.